All right, we're going to kind of jump topics now. We're going to go back to the state of the North, and we're going to take a deeper dive into all four teams, starting in the basement and working our way up. That means we start with the Chicago Bears, who lost the last, I believe, 8 games of the year, if I'm not mistaken, to secure the number 1 overall pick. They finished dead last in the league in the Football Power Index, number 32. They have the most cap space of any team going into the offseason, so that's a real plus for them. Over $118 million right now of cap space. That's without even making any moves. They are looking good. They have 8 draft picks, as we said, the number 1 overall. Pro Football Focus listed their needs as offensive line, defensive line, and wide receiver. So let's talk about the Bears for a minute. In my opinion, I mean, they've got offensive line as the number 1 need because obviously Justin Fields had no time in the pocket. They allowed 50 sacks, which was the worst in the NFL. They allowed 55 sacks this year. That's number 1 worst in the league. So their offensive line definitely needs help. But their defensive line, they also were number 1 because they registered only 20 sacks. They were dead last in the league in that. So offensive line, defensive line's where this team's got to start. They got plenty of money. What should they go after in the draft and free agency? Melvin G., tell us.
I've talked to plenty of Bear fans, and most of the Bear fans, that I talk to, they want the D-line. Now, it's mixed whether, they want Jalen Carter or Will Anderson, but they want that D-line with that first pick if they can't trade it back or whatever, or even when they do trade back, doing whatever. Either or, honestly, if you look at the offensive line, like, a lot of that's on Justin Fields, too. He's still holding that ball too long. Now, is that because his wide receivers don't get open or, the routes are too long or what have you? The fact remains he's still holding that ball too long. So he's giving that defensive line work. And then plus, when you have a mobile quarterback who's, going to move and move the pocket, it gets a little harder for an offensive line to block, when quarterbacks move the pocket. So you got to factor that in too. So I kind of think the more pressing need would probably be defensive line. When it comes to wide receiver, I don't know, how early you go there because I think you build around everything else before you really start going, trying to get that star wide receiver or whatever, going out and spending a little money and getting a guy like Sharp or a few years back, spending a little money and getting like a Marvin Jones like we did. You know what I mean? So,
well, that kid from USC, the wide receiver Addison, declared for the NFL draft. He's going to be the highest ranked wide receiver coming out of college this year. The Bears could trade back and still get him. There's going to be a few teams looking for a quarterback in this draft. Presumably, the Bears have their quarterback, but you get a guy like Jalen Carter or Will Anderson. These are game-changing defensive players. I mean, potentially, right? What do you think, Russ? What are they looking for?
Their whole franchise really kind of reminds me of us last year when we just kind of like got rid of everything. We got that they got into the the dead cap type of thing, and they just wanted to pull the Band-Aid off. So I think that they knew what they were getting into. Poles knew what he was getting into for this year, and next year it's just kind of like they need everything. So really, it really does become a best player available type of thing. Because if you say, oh well, they only need defensive line, or they only need a quarterback, like really, whatever, they need everything. They need a cornerback. They need linebackers. They need every level of the offense and defense. Definitely offensive line. You know how big I am on offensive line. If they don't get Justin Fields some offensive line help, or the next guy some offensive line help, the dude's going to be dead by week 3, and it ain't going to matter.
By the time they get a line that can protect him, he's going to have a repaired shoulder and pins in his ankles.
Right.
And what good's that going to do you? There's a lot of speculation that the Bears might draft a quarterback. I don't think that happens. Even though this regime that's in charge now didn't draft Justin Fields, I really believe they have to stick with him just because of the superstar potential that he has, for sure. But for sure, they're going to have to address wide receiver, whether that be in free agency or the draft, one way or the other. I expect them to go free agency to get a wide receiver. No wide receiver on the Chicago Bears recorded at least 500 yards this year. That's paltry, worst in the league. There's been a lot of speculation DeAndre Hopkins could come to Chicago. I think that's a great fit. Obviously, D-Hop, top 3 in the league in wide receivers, no doubt. I think that's a good fit. What do you think of D-Hop coming to Chicago, Melvin?
Not at this stage in their rebuild. I mean, you're talking big money for an old wide receiver. You know what I mean? Like he could come back next year and just finally the age caught him or whatever. He hasn't really been healthy the last 2 seasons. He missed a couple games, with his sore knees. This year he missed time, last year with his knees. So he's getting older. At this point in their rebuild, you don't spend that kind of money on an older wide receiver unless you're ready to take that step.
Yeah, well, you're right. You're right. Build through the trenches. That's the way to go. So offensive, defensive line, but something's got to give in that wide receiver position for the Bears. I think it's a good fit with DeAndre Hopkins. Let's face it, this part of his career, he might just be looking for money. He's still got the juice. I don't care. He missed 6 games due to suspension.
And missed 2 with his knee, though.
2 and lost 2 to his knee, which, average receiver misses a couple games a year. I think that the upside for the Bears to get D-Hop would be huge. That would be a portion of that cap space they have to spend, and then they could focus on the draft, getting young and big up front on both sides of the ball. In the comments, we've got one Facebook user who says Justin Fields has to do better with the reads of his receivers while holding the ball too long. I agree with that, and he's got to get better at putting the ball on his receivers.
Yep.
He couldn't seem to complete a pass down the stretch of the season. People want to blame the O-line. That's fine, but I think the kid's got a long way to go as a passer. But secretly, I'm rooting for him. Don't tell Greg Rice. Okay, let's move on now to the Packers because they finished 3rd in the division this year at 8-9.